Live from the Ken and Valerie Baker studio at WHYY, this is Studio 2.
On Monday, April 6th, welcome, friends, on into the program. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt. Today, human beings are going to travel further from the Earth than they've ever gone before.
Pretty cool.
I mean, that's amazing. Doesn't feel like the reaction is commensurate with the accomplishment, but we're going to talk about it all this hour. Artemis II. Why are we doing it? What's the ultimate goal? Is the American public enthusiastic about that goal, willing to spend billions, trillions of dollars to reach that goal? We have a couple great experts with us. They're going to talk about what the Artemis II mission is all about, what comes after it, what it would be like to live on the moon, maybe even Mars. And of course, we want to hear from you this hour. Do you think investing in space exploration is worth it? Are you excited or are you wah-wah about this whole Artemis thing? 888-477-9499. Email studio2@whyy.org. YouTube, Facebook. Drop a comment in the chat. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, people were so excited about space, Cherry. They were drinking Tang, which is horrible. Yeah. But they were drinking it just because it was associated with space. And now I don't know.
I know. And I remember I was like in first or second grade, the Challenger space shuttle went up.
Yeah.
And I remember like school stopped.
Yeah.
And they wheeled a little TV in class and everybody sat down and we watched it. I mean, it was a tragedy.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. But that's how big of a deal it was that you paid attention and the nation stopped. And I just didn't. I don't know. Did it feel like the nation stopped for this?
It did not. And maybe it's because we have other problems that are more pressing, although plenty of problems in the late 60s. But anyways, it's an interesting question to explore this hour. And I'm curious what we'll hear from the folks out there listening.
Yep.
Because that might sort of drive the conversation this hour.
Yeah, question.
Yeah, it just feels like there's a cognitive dissonance. There's an enthusiasm gap. I don't know.
Yeah. Again, the question, do you think investing in space exploration is worth it? Call 888-477-9499. Email studio2@whyy.org. And we have our trio of news stories.
All occurring here on Earth.
Yes. The latest numbers are in when it comes to Affordable Care Act disenrollment in Pennsylvania. Since November, 120,000 Pennsylvanians have canceled their health insurance through Penny. That's our state's Affordable Care Act exchange. And if you recall, the COVID era Obama subsidies encouraged many people to get health insurance. And a record number of people were signed up through Penny just last year. But those tax credits, they expired at the end of last year, and Republican lawmakers and the president, they declined to extend them. So monthly premiums for health insurance skyrocketed for millions of Americans beginning this January. And, you know, with rising rents, mortgages, groceries, gas prices, utilities, you name it, families had to make some tough decisions. And many of them, 120,000 of them, said, you know what? We're not going to pay for health care. This leaves them vulnerable, of course, to unexpected medical expenses. And according to Penny data, the number of folks hardest hit are the people ages 55 to 64. That's the largest number of cancellations. And because their insurance tends to be more expensive.
And also significant number among people ages 26 through 44. Nice reporting by WHYY's Nicole Leonard, who talked with one of these families that had pulled out of the exchange. And, you know, from what I could, glean from Nicole's reporting, like it was a case of a family where there was like a youngish couple, 2 kids. It seemed like everyone was healthy. And so they're going to roll the dice this year.
Rolling the dice.
But we've talked about this so many times. You know, insurance is all about pooled risk, and you need healthy people in the pool, or else the pool gets real nasty, real fast, right? From a money perspective. And so, that was sort of a blinking red light to me. If those are the types of people that are leaving these exchanges, how do they function long term?
Yeah. And hopefully, something will change and, Congress will get it together and, get the subsidies back or come up with another plan so that people can get coverage because it is needed. It is needed.
Story number 2.
Dose.
A beloved South Jersey roadside market known for its award-winning oysters says it can't open for the season because of a permitting and land use issue. So Sweet Amalia Market and Kitchen, located in Gloucester County alongside a 2-lane highway, has become an unlikely destination dining spot known for its oysters. They make all the best of lists, etc., etc. And they usually open for the season around now, but not this year. They just posted on social media this morning that, quote, our business growth has triggered land use changes that require careful consideration by the Pinelands Commission, municipal, and county authorities. And they say as they wait for these approvals, they've been asked to remove their very popular outdoor seating section. They don't want to do that, so they're just not going to open until they get a full green light. And I love Sweet Amalia, so I'm very sad about this, and I hope it's resolved soon. And I'm wondering what the heck's going on, because the details are scant here, Cherry.
Yeah, and I feel so bad for them because they've built up such goodwill with the community. They're very popular. Folks love them. But I will say this is not the first time Sweet Amalia's has had zoning or land use issues. Back in 2023, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, they had to stop their indoor dining option and switch to takeout and the outdoor thing. With the outdoor picnic tables that people fell in love with, right? And they never went back to the indoor part. So this has become their main, thing, and people kind of fell in love with it. And they said, people travel all the way from different parts of our region to come get those oysters. Yeah. I love oysters. I've never been there.
Oh, you gotta go.
And I'm like, this is really sad, and it's messing with their bottom line.
Yeah. The bottom line for me is I hope they reopen. I hope this doesn't sink them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always get like curious about these land use disputes. Is it something about the land use that's really harmful to the environment or the community? Or
I wonder what it's about. Yeah. I couldn't find anything about. I didn't know.
Right. Or sometimes these disputes are about like a business is growing too fast and it brings a lot of people and traffic, and the local community says slow down, and then they find something, in the land use. So I'm curious which one of these is at play here.
And by the way, some folks in the comments on the Sweet Amalia's page pointed out that Pinelands, their commission has also been in the headlines, and I found a few as they wrestle over whether data centers should be able to use land. And I would think that Sweet Amalia's should be able to use it over the data centers, but
I would say
it's not probably either or. But
a few picnic tables probably less harmful to the environment than a data center. But we're not experts. Maybe. Mm-hmm. We're just guessing.
We're guessing, but I hope they figure that out, and that you
got to go there if you like oysters.
I got it. Well, open back up, Sweet Amalia's.
Yeah,
Pinelands, get it together. Come on.
She needs the oysters.
Yeah,
she's got a shuck, folks.
Yes, I love it. I got a shuck. And by the way,
she's got a shuck.
She got a shuck.
We all have to shuck.
There was a lot of shuck use going on this weekend.
Boom! Transition.
Because if you probably watched the NCAA women's tournament, there has been a lot of back and forth. Even though Philadelphia native Dawn Staley's South Carolina Gamecocks lost, I'm going to start with the positive news. Even though the Philadelphia native Dawn Staley's South Carolina Gamecocks lost the National Women's NCAA championship to UCLA this weekend, kudos to UCLA. The iconic coach still made basketball history. Let me explain. Dawn Staley has led the Gamecocks to the Final Four 6 consecutive times from 2021 to present, and to 3 consecutive national championship games. She won in 2024, by the way. And she was in the news all this weekend after a little bit of a kerfuffle following the Final Four game against UConn when Coach Gino Auremia, who is from Norristown and went to Westchester, by the way, got big mad at Staley, and he accused her of not shaking his hand at one point during the match, even though in fact she had shook his hand earlier in that same match. They had a bit of an argument. He apologized.
You called it a kerfuffle?
Yeah, kerfuffle.
It was a little more than a kerfuffle.
Yeah, she yelled at him.
Oh, there were
words were said.
There.
Words were said. And Staley, she kept it moving, but the Gamecocks, they lost big. UCLA nabbed the championship 79-51. But Staley, she ended the game so differently. Let's take a look at her closing remarks after UCLA beat them. Take a look.
Look, I'm always happy for people who worked hard, in this game, who are really quality people. I want good things to happen for them. And Corey is one of those people who really works at, at making our game better. Not just UCLA, but our entire game.
And I just love that. A true example of sportsmanship. And my timeline was on fire about this, Avi, because, you know, the game has grown. And this was a testament to that, because everybody was talking about this.
Yeah, and the purists might not want to hear this, but the fact that Gino Auriemma and Dawn Staley got in this confrontation is a sign of the sport's health.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, you really need two ingredients to grow a sport outside of what happens on the court or the field. You need the perception of competitive balance, so anything can happen, anyone can win, and you need narrative.
And some beefs every once in a while.
You need beefs. I mean, you need heroes, you need villains, and you can't, that's the part you can't speed up and you can't manufacture. So you have two coaches who are legends, who've been around the game a long time. They clearly don't like each other. And that is going to create storylines and momentum for the sport moving forward.
Yeah.
I mean, it will. And by the way, speaking of the first thing, competitive balance, there were 4 straight years where UConn and Gino Auriemma won the national championship. And who ended that run?
Yeah. Dawn Staley, of course.
South Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they helped bring this competitive balance back to the sport that has now spawned a rivalry. And whether you like this stuff or not, you consider it extracurricular or not, this is going to build the sport.
And it's so cool. And shout out to the WNBA. They have a record-breaking collective bargaining agreement, which means the ladies will make a lot more money. I'm just so happy that the sport has grown. So anyway, we're going to be talking about space travel and exploration. Do you think it's worth it? The investments that's being made, 888-477-9499. We'll be right back.
And welcome back, fellow Earth travelers, to Studio 2 on WHYY. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arndt.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. Within the next 2 hours, the crew of NASA's Artemis II mission is set to surpass the record for the farthest distance traveled from Earth by humans. As the space capsule Orion loops around the moon, the 4 astronauts will take in sights never seen before by human eyes.
The crew is the first to leave Earth's orbit since Apollo 17 in 1972. Wow. And NASA's ramp-up of its space program is just getting started, folks. By 2028, the agency wants to return humans to the lunar surface and then gradually build a permanent moon base before sending people to Mars.
Meanwhile, China is chasing a similar goal. So today, we are unpacking the new space race at a cost of billions of dollars and decades-long timeline. What's at stake, and is the American public on board? Joining us to discuss this is Christian Davenport. He's a CBS space correspondent and the author of the book Rocket Dreams, Musk, Bezos, and the inside story of the new $1 trillion space race. Christian, welcome to Studio 2. So great to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And thank you, our listeners, for being with us as well. We have a question for you. Do you think investing in space exploration is worth it? Call 888-477-9499. Email studio2@whyy.org. If you're streaming on YouTube or Facebook, drop a comment in the chat.
And, Christian, before we get into the politics and the billionaires and all the race for, living on the moon, a lot of people hear moon mission and they think, didn't we already do that? And so can you put this in context for why this is such a big deal and why the average person should really be paying attention to this?
Yeah, a lot of people look at it and say, we've been there, done that. What's new? Why should we go ahead and try to even do it? But the fact of the matter is that the Artemis program, the moon mission that NASA's pursuing today, is so different from the Apollo program of the late 60s and the early 70s. During the Apollo era, there were several white men who went to the surface, walked around, drove a moon buggy, planted flags, and came home and never returned. And as you mentioned, the last of those missions was in 1972, so more than 50 years ago. What NASA is trying to do under the Artemis program is to build a more sustainable presence, to go there and to stay. And there's one key significant development that we've learned since the Apollo era, and that is that the moon is wet. There is water on the moon. That is a very significant resource. Having water, obviously, it's key to sustain human life, but the component parts, hydrogen and oxygen, could be used to power spacecraft, to fuel spacecrafts to go further out into the solar system. And like the Apollo era, we're in a space race, as you mentioned today, with China that is also trying to go to the region of the moon, the South Pole. That's sort of the hot real estate of the moon right now, because that's where the water is. And whoever controls that sort of real estate and that resource, could have a significant advantage. And not just in space, but I think there are a lot of people who look at space and see how it can help determine the balance of power on Earth as well.
Wow.
So in order to establish this more permanent presence on the moon, why do we have to do this first? Why do we have to have these 4 astronauts slingshot around the moon first?
Right. So what they're doing in a step-by-step testing approach, as we did in Apollo. You don't just build a rocket and a spacecraft and go try to fly it on the moon. What NASA first did was they took this spacecraft, which is called Orion, and several years ago, they did a similar mission. They flew it around the moon, but there were no people on board. They just wanted to see, how it behaved in space, how it performed. Would it be safe to put astronauts on it? Would the heat shield work? Would the parachutes work? Would it be able to, fly safely? And so now what they're doing is the next step. Okay, we tested it. It seemed to work okay. There were some problems with the heat shield, but they feel like they've got a handle on that. So they felt confident that this time they can put humans on it. And that's what they're going to do. This is all test mission. And after this, they're not even going to land. They're going to then do the next mission next year, where they're going to fly the Orion spacecraft and then try to dock it in Earth orbit with one of 2 potential lunar landers that would then ferry the astronauts down to the lunar surface and then back to lunar orbit. And then if all of that goes well, then we have a landing that could take place in 2028. So these are all steps on the way to that eventual landing, which NASA hopes to be in 2028, but we'll see.
Yeah. And MJ says online, he says, I used to be excited by space travel. Now I think it's viewed as just another way to exploit national resources in order to make rich people richer. And so I want to ask you, this sounds very exciting, Christian. And I at the setup of the show, Avi and I were talking about it doesn't feel like it's broken through at a level that it did break through in the 70s and then during, the Apollo season. Why do you think that is, given the advancements that could be made, given the ambitious nature of the plans that are ahead?
No, I agree with you. It hasn't broken through in that same way. But that's in large part, as you said earlier, we've done this before. It's not a first. I mean, there are some firsts in the sense that we are going further than ever before, but that's by a matter of 4,000 miles or so. It's not a huge milestone. It's not going to land on the moon. But I think it is significant nonetheless. I mean, you've got the first woman to travel to the moon, the first African American, the first non-U.S. citizen, a Canadian. But no, it doesn't just resonate. I think that's in large part also because of the media environment that we're in. It's so fractured. People get their news from so many different sources. But if you talk about the importance of space, to bring it down to a sort of a granular level that goes beyond the Artemis program, we rely on so much for space that I think the American public just doesn't realize. Like for example, I mean, you guys have iPhones. I assume you've got that little blue dot on your phone that shows you where you are in Google Maps, and you use that for Uber Eats and DoorDash and all these applications. The military obviously uses that signal, that GPS signal, to make sure that its munitions, its bombs are guided precisely so that they hit the terrorist compound and not the school next door, right? All of that is GPS. All of that is based in space. There are only 31 of those satellites, but perhaps the most important part of that satellite constellation isn't the location part, it's the timing mechanism. There's actually atomic clocks on those satellites that are very, very precise. And we use that timing for every banking transaction, every ATM transaction, every trade on the New York Stock Exchange. And all those satellites are up there. And if anything could happen to them, and we know that they are vulnerable to cyber attack and other sorts of kinetic attack, then not only do you not have Uber Eats and DoorDash, but in reality, the entire financial system could collapse. And that's just one example of how we use space, everyday citizens, in our daily lives.
So building off of that, and perhaps a little pro-con here. So Sean says, we just want healthcare for all, not trillions spent on space and wars. Sid, echoing what you said, Christian, says, aside from scientific advancement, the space program has resulted in products for commercial use, including LED lighting and CAT scans. Let me bring in a caller now. This is Scott from Afton, Pennsylvania, on line 2, who wants to comment on the usefulness of space exploration. Scott, you're on Studio 2. What would you like to share?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So just for background, I'm 70 years old. I have a PhD in chemistry. And the number of people in my generation who were inspired by the space program is tremendous. I met hundreds of scientists in my career, astrophysicists, doctors, you name it, that couldn't become astronauts, but we love the idea of scientific exploration and discovering something new. And our inspiration was the space program.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Scott. So talking about sort of the inspiration and what's resulted from space exploration, Christian, I suppose one counter argument is that we could do all of this stuff, or we could invest in these technologies without pursuing lunar ambitions. I mean, is that true? Or how much of this do we need to do to get the sort of ROI, return on investment, we've been talking about here?
Yeah, well, I think there are a few ways to look at it. That I think in terms of the ROI, you can look at the scientific aspects of it. I mean, the moon is our closest neighbor, and in some ways it's a gift that we have this moon that's only just a few days away, and that can tell us so much about the formation of the solar system and, the beginning of the solar system and the universe and where we come from and those big existential questions. It's also possible that there are some resources on the moon like helium-3 that could be quite valuable, that there's economic and financial gain by going and extracting those resources. There's, I think, a diplomatic reason for this. There are geopolitical alliances that form in space. If China is the only nation that is on the lunar surface and looking for those resources, looking for the water, the helium-3, and just making these big discoveries about the formation of the solar system, then other nations are going to partner with them. Perhaps even our allies, they would look at the United States and say, you're not there, but China is. And finally, I'd say there's also national security implications. Not in space in general. I just mentioned talking about the GPS system, but even out by the moon. I mean, because we cannot really see what's going out there And so that's why we have a United States Space Force that is looking after, this area as a very strategic area for military use as well. So when you combine all of that scientific discovery, economics, geopolitical, and then the national security aspects, then you begin to see the arguments of not only is going to space
given
good
all-
in its own right, but better here on Earth.
Given all that, Christian, why did we stop pursuing this? Like,
Yeah,
why
for
was there
50
this
years.
huge gap? Because obviously we still had a space program, but it was not geared toward lunar ambitions. So what explains this big gap?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And it really gets to, it's a political question. It's a matter of where you want to put your resources. We went to the moon. We had that last mission in 1972. And a lot of people at NASA at the time said, great, now we push on to Mars. But we didn't do that. There was a war in Vietnam at the time. There was a lot of civil strife here in the United States at the time, and it just didn't, and it took up a lot of resources, and people wanted a lot, I think, priorities here on Earth. Instead, we went to low Earth orbit, and we built the International Space Station and the Space Shuttle, which shouldn't be discounted. I mean, yes, it's not going to the moon, but we have had human beings living continuously in space for 25 years. I mean, that's not nothing. To have a continuous presence in Earth orbit for that long is extraordinary. But now there's this realization that we need to push back to the moon. And a key, differentiator is that we've got this growing commercial sector, which is what I cover in the book Rocket Dreams. Companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin that are dramatically bringing down the cost of access to space with new technologies like reusable rockets that we just didn't have before. And that is actually, in the long run, will lower the cost.
And that's my follow-up question to you, because I wrote down here public versus private investment. And I think about, how this was very government focused, with NASA sort of taking the lead, and you saw the big government investment. And so now, can you talk about, you touched on it a little bit, about how private sector advancements have really sort of changed the game. How has that expanded NASA? What is NASA's role? Are they partners with them? Competitors? What does that look like now that you have so many private entities and corporations getting in the space game?
Yeah, so NASA, of course, owned and operated the space shuttle. But when the space shuttle was retired in 2011, NASA didn't have the ability to fly astronauts anywhere. In fact, we sent our astronauts over to Russia for Russia to launch our astronauts to the International Space Station. Ultimately, NASA awarded contracts to Boeing and SpaceX to do that. So right now, SpaceX is the only way that NASA has to get its astronauts into orbit. And the spacecraft that lands NASA astronauts on the moon is also going to be either from SpaceX or Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin, these private companies. So they can move faster, they're innovating, and there is a lot of progress in the private sector that have brought down the cost, and they've shown they can do it reliably and safely. And so NASA said, you are trusted partners, but they're government contractors is what they are.
Yeah.
And there is, I think, a danger of outsourcing so much of this national enterprise into the hands of the private sector. And really, so much of that is bound up in Elon Musk's SpaceX. And you might recall when Elon and President Trump had their fallout after the inauguration, Elon threatened to take away the spacecraft that NASA relies on to get its astronauts to the International Space Station. He's since rescinded that threat, but that sort of shows you some of the dangers.
And my quick follow-up to that is that, you talked about satellite and how, important satellite communication is to the things we do every single day, from using GPS and Uber and all that to our financial markets. But Starlink has become, that's on Elon Musk, innovation there. That satellite has become critical in war times for folks literally in active war. And so what issues do you see there as well? Because there's a lot of national security issues, not just on behalf of America, but Ukraine, other countries as well who may be in conflict.
Yeah, and you saw the controversy in the Ukraine war, as you mentioned, where Ukraine desperately wanted the Starlink service activated in the Crimea region, and Elon didn't want to get involved and sort of turned them down on that. And you see the enormous and outsized responsibility and significance that this one company and this one system has. And there is a recognition, in the U.S. government, and particularly in the Pentagon and NASA, that it wants a robust commercial space sector. It wants a lot of competitors so that if one misbehaves or has an accident, they have backups, they have redundancies, and they'll have to compete, and that'll bring the cost down, and that'll bring the services up and the access to space up. But what we've seen is that space is so hard, and that SpaceX has dominated. They've really, for a long time, been the only game in town. Now, that is starting to change with other companies like Blue Origin finally getting momentum and putting up, their own constellation of satellites. And, the Pentagon can look at that and say, to company A, if you're going to behave this way, then we're not going to use your services. We're going to go to another one. But I think we really now need that level of competition that will not just drive the cost down, but the efficiency up.
We'd love to hear from you this hour. Are you excited about this Artemis II stuff? Do you think it's worth investing in space exploration? 888-477-9499. Email studio2@whyy.org. Pamela says it is expensive, but not as much as stupid wars of choice or tax cuts for millionaires. Gloria says, I'd much rather spend money on space exploration than on war. Speaking of spending money and cost, Christian, you've been emphasizing this over and over, how the cost has come down, thanks in part to competition from private providers. Why is that so important to the future of space exploration?
Yeah, because it's just been so prohibitively expensive to get to space. I mean, if you think about it, when you fly out of Philadelphia airport and you fly to, say, Los Angeles, imagine if after every single flight they threw the airplane away.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
That's
yeah.
what we did in space for decades. You threw the rockets away. They fell into the ocean. Now you've seen these amazing videos where the first stage, anyway, flies to space. The second stage, the spacecraft or the satellites are deployed into orbit. And then that booster comes back down and lands and then is refurbished and flies again like an airplane. And SpaceX's Starship spacecraft not only lands, but it lands back on its launch pad. So it's literally landing on the spot where then it's going to be refueled and go off again. So you've got a magnitude of order difference just because you don't throw the hardware away.
So what is that all leading to? Is it leading to really, really frequent trips? And then how would that change the game? Like, just the fact that it's cheaper leads exactly to what potential future?
Well, I mean, you've seen a lot more satellites go up because SpaceX is launching a rocket, once every 2 or 3 days. Now you go down to Cape Canaveral, and it used to be, in a good year, you would see maybe one launch a month, sometimes just 10 launches a year. Now you go down there, and it's like every 2 or 3 days, and they're putting up the constellation of satellites. And it's not just the technology advancements in the rockets, it's also the technology advancements in the satellites themselves. They used to cost, $200-300 million per satellite. They were very big, very exquisite, very capable, because the engineers knew they would have to last for 10, 20, 30 years because it's so expensive to launch one. Well, now that it's not as expensive, throw them up there, and the computing power, is so much more robust so that, you can have the power of your little iPhone. You've got satellites now that are the size of a loaf of bread, even, that are going up. And so you've got, hundreds of them, thousands of them up there, and they're so much more powerful in terms of their compute power.
So interesting. By the way, do you think investing in space exploration is worth it? And are you excited about this latest mission? The number to call is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And for our streamers on Facebook and YouTube, keep those comments coming. Anoon from West Philly is on the line. Anoon, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Hi, yeah. So I teach at a university here in Philly. I have 17 to 20-year-olds. And I brought up on Friday that we were having this Artemis II launch happening. None of my students were aware of it. And we had a previous caller talk about how inspirational the first moon landing was. I just wanted to bring up, are we doing sufficient youth outreach? Because I was very shocked that none of my students even knew that this was happening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anoon, from West Philly. And we only have a couple minutes before we go to break, Christian, but I just wondered, the president talked about this briefly in his speech last week, but I wonder, this was a big national deal 50 plus years ago. Do you think we've made a big enough national deal today?
Yeah, it's just not getting the attention that it did in a previous era. And astronauts in general are just not household names. I remember I asked an astronaut that, and I said, everybody knew John Glenn and Neil Armstrong and Jim Lovell and Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins. These were household names. There were ticker tape parades going down. And does it bother you that you're not a household name? And he said, no. And the reason I'm not is because so many other people have done it. There have been, I think, a total of 600 people who have been to space. And so it's not at that level anymore. I do think when we land on the moon again, if we have the first woman land on the moon, that will be a big deal. But even during the Apollo era, after Apollo 11 landed, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, the polls showed that the American public and I think worldwide interest in the space program dropped even then. So even at the height of the first space race, at the dawn of the space age, people were glued in at the beginning, but then the interest fell away even then. And we're seeing that, I guess, to some extent today.
One thing that could break through is people living on a somewhat permanent basis on the moon. Yeah. And we're going to talk about that possibility moving forward because as we've mentioned, it does seem to be moving, NASA hopes, in that direction. We've got another guest to bring in. We'll talk about some of the engineering and biological hurdles we'd have to overcome to establish a base camp on the moon. So stay tuned for that conversation and keep your comments and questions coming. 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, drop a comment in the chat. This is Studio 2. We'll be right back.
And welcome back to Studio 2 here on WHYY. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt. We're talking about NASA's Artemis II mission, which is circling the moon today. The astronauts will soon begin taking photos and making observations of geological features, including things never seen before.
Yeah, this mission is in preparation for Artemis IV in 2028, which plans to land humans on the moon's surface and gradually build a permanent settlement there. NASA says Mars would be next.
Unpacking all of this with us guest has been Christian Davenport, CBS space correspondent and author of Rocket Dreams, Musk, Bezos, and the inside story of the new $1 trillion space race. And now we want to welcome in a new guest, Scott Solomon, professor of evolutionary biology at Rice University and author of Becoming Martian, How Living in Space Will Change Our Bodies and Minds. Scott, thanks for joining us on Studio 2.
Thanks so much for having me. What an exciting day.
Yes, it is. And we want to hear from you, our listeners. A reminder, our question of the day is, do you think investing in space exploration is worth it? And are you excited about this latest mission? You can give us a call, 888-477-9499, or email studio2@whyy.org. And for our streamers on YouTube or Facebook, keep the comments coming in the chat.
Some folks just have clarifying questions. Maybe we'll knock out a couple of those. Jared says, your guest says this current mission to the moon reflects the first non-U.S. citizen to go. What about the former Soviet Union, China, and India? Didn't they land on the moon? I think I can field this one. No, Jared, they did not. So we all agree on that, guys, on the panel. So I think Jared,
no humans,
no humans, exactly. So I think Jared, you're probably conflating manned and unmanned missions there. Frank says, why do they keep saying the far side of the moon has never been seen before? Didn't the Apollo missions have windows so they could see the far side as they orbited the moon? So, Christian, could you knock that one out for us? Like, we have been around the moon before, right, Christian? This is a little bit different, though, in terms of what we'll be able to observe. Just explain the difference real quick.
Yeah, and we're not going into lunar orbit. It's going around, so it's going to look like the size of a basketball, I think, at arm's length, and so you get to see the moon in its entirety. And there are parts of the moon, just because of the lighting conditions, that humans haven't seen before. And interestingly, actually, NASA didn't know what the lighting conditions were going to be until they actually lifted off, because they change so quickly once they get out there. So they had to sort of scramble and say, this is, what you're going to be able to see. And they had a lift of objectives for the astronauts to take pictures, and they're going to take thousands of pictures and get to see all of that.
Wonderful. And so I'm going to bring in a caller because I think this can tee up our conversation with you, Scott. Alan from Reading, Pennsylvania is on the line. Alan, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
I think one of the things that we're falling short on is understanding that human biology would require the first family to colonize Mars to probably be born on the moon. So robotics will have to be at a stage where a base camp and a boot camp for colonizers who will all be born in space, because if you observe Kelly, and he being the longest astronaut on the space station, his organs shrank. And that's even with the calisthenics that they do on a treadmill. So one of the things that I think is happening is what the Red Hot Chili Peppers kind of said. Space may be the final frontier, but thus far, it's clearly created in a Hollywood basement.
Okay.
All right,
Alan, we got you.
Alan,
so a lot of people still obviously have their doubts.
Alan is skeptical.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of skeptics out here, like Alan's, quoting the Red Hot Chili Peppers there.
Which was an accurate quote of the song, by the way. I will say that.
By the way, so Scott, I want you to break it down for us. I mean, this is Christian talked about the long-term mission is to eventually allow people to live, on the moon and to then go to Mars eventually. What would it take for us to get there? What kind of infrastructure would need to be built? What kind of discoveries would we need to have in order to make that a reality?
Yeah, well, I think the caller actually made some important points, which is that if our goals include the idea of actually living in space, whether it's on the moon or eventually Mars, there are some important things that would have to happen, right? We would need to be able to, first of all, live there for an extended period of time, but we also would need to eventually be able to have children there. There are a lot of things that we still don't know about how the conditions of the moon or Mars affect adults, but we know next to nothing about whether human reproduction is even possible in the conditions of space, and whether it would be affected by, for example, having a child raised in a low gravity environment. So a lot of important science that still needs to happen before that possible future could come to pass.
Wow. And when you think about the environment, like to just be able to live there for an extended period of time and not be in a shuttle, what would we need to be able to do to make that a reality?
Well, there's a few things. One is obviously you need a place to live. So you can, take a spacecraft like, the Starship that's currently being developed by SpaceX as one example, and use that as a place to live. Now, you would probably need to be protecting it further by piling up some lunar soil or regolith on top, because there's very high levels of radiation exposure on the moon. This is true of Mars as well. So you need to shield people from that if they're going to be there for a prolonged amount of time. But then you need to do things like grow food, right? So we're used to the astronauts on the International Space Station being resupplied every few months typically, and they can bring food with them, including fresh food, which is highly valued by astronauts. If you're going to be on an extended mission in deep space, whether it's on the moon or eventually Mars, you probably need to be living off the land. So that means we need to be able to raise crops in order to grow food and, also harvest water, because it's very heavy to bring up all of the water that we would need. You want to take it from ice that we know is already there on the moon.
Okay, this is a silly question. Like a base camp on the moon, Christian, what does it look like? Is it like a big bio bubble? I remember the Pauly Shore movie. I'm just trying to visualize what a base camp even would look like.
Well, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman touched on this, and he said at first it's going to be probably pretty ugly. It's going to look not like some science fiction version of it, but you're going to see a lot of cargo spacecraft that would go out ahead of time that would not carry astronauts, but carry supplies, carry all the infrastructure that you need. I mean, you need power generation, transportation, habitats. You need that equipment that's going to go up there. Some of these spacecraft may land, some may not, some may crash. So it might be messy for a little while. And there is, as we were just hearing about, that there is this problem with the radiation. So you're going to want to maybe go dig down and have tunnels and be sort of under the crust of the moon as well, or cover your habitats with the regolith, with that lunar soil. But it's going to, as a friend of mine said, and he was speaking more about Mars than the moon, but say that first Mars mission happens and everything goes perfectly, and it's this historic moment, that even then, humans are now on Mars in a triumphant moment. It is still a moment of crisis, because space is always trying to kill you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so interesting. I want to read a couple comments. We have Gian, who says, I am more excited than ever before about space exploration and am fully supportive of significant investment in space exploration by the U.S. David Began on YouTube says, the question is how we balance our ambitions in space with our responsibilities here at home. And let me bring another caller in. We have Destiny from Percy, excuse me about that. Destiny from Percy, Pennsylvania on the line. Destiny, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Hi, my name is Destiny. I have a comment on how I feel about the Artemis II mission.
Okay.
So I kind of feel like it's like a really good thing, because we're circling back to what we started back in the 60s, and I feel like returning to it, we're going to be opening some doors for ourselves in the future, opening doors to space exploration. And I feel like it's going to be a really historic moment for us again this year in 2026.
I love it. And Destiny, how old are you?
I'm 17.
17. So this is thank you so much, Destiny, for being on Studio 2. Destiny's excited by this idea of us going back to space.
As a counterpoint, here's what John has to say. I believe that space exploration is absolutely worth pursuing, but human space missions are greatly overrated. Robotic and AI technology will allow us to do virtually everything without the hassle of trying to take care of humans' needs in space. Scott, I would love for you to contend with that. Like the balance between just extending our technological influence into space versus trying to support human life. Like, what are the pros and cons of each? Because base camp on the moon sounds really cool to me, but I also wonder why, if indeed we can gather a lot of the information we might need using robots and technology.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it's absolutely true that we can do an incredible amount with the robotic technology that we have these days. I mean, there are rovers currently operating on Mars. They're making incredible discoveries. They're increasingly using AI to become more automated, and their capabilities just keep growing. Of course, robots don't need many of the things that humans need. So it's much cheaper to send robots. We don't have to worry as much about, keeping them resupplied with food and water and all these types of things. So there's a lot of advantages to robotic technology, but there are limitations. For one thing, as advanced as that technology is, there's still a lot of things that a person could easily do that we are far from having a robot being capable of doing. But I think that we have to also ask, and you've alluded to this, like, what is the long-term vision? What is the long-term goal? If the long-term goal is to eventually have people in these places, then we need to make sure that we know how to keep them safe and what happens to their
And
bodies.
why would that be the long-term goal?
Yeah,
Is it
what's
because
the goal and purpose?
we figure Earth's a ticking clock here, or is it just to do it? The sort of the Everest explanation by Hillary. Like, what is the reason for having humans potentially living for extended period of time on the moon, Scott?
Yeah, it depends who you ask. So there definitely are people that see it as like, this is just like a cool thing to do. There's a lot of cool science that we can do. But I do think that at the end of the day, if we don't ever leave Earth, there is a strong argument to be made that we are more vulnerable, right? If something were to happen to the Earth, whether it's a human-caused disaster or something like the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, right? If we are all on one planet, have all our eggs in one basket, so to speak, right? Then we're more vulnerable. So that idea is one of them. One of the motivations that has, caused people to say, hey, let's see if it would be possible for us to be spread out and to become multiplanetary, and that would, increase the chances that human life continues in the long run.
Yeah, so interesting. Paul from Northeast Philadelphia says, this is all a waste of money. People want health care. What a waste of money. Let the private sector tackle this. And so, Christian, I just wonder some of the political arguments that you hear, like for or more funding as a time when priorities are shifting under this administration. Like, how do you make the argument to dream and to think, as we hear Scott thinking, and wanting to keep this, our funding and our attention and, our priority focused on space exploration?
Yeah, I mean, space is a reflection of our national priorities and what we think is important. And, the caller mentioned, the blurring of the lines that we've been talking about between what's, inherently governmental and what should be moved into the private sector. And clearly, Scott was earlier talking about Starship, which is one of the spacecraft that NASA wants to use to land humans on the moon. It's so big and so powerful. It also actually could reimagine the way scientists build telescopes that are deployed into space and to see deeper into space. I mean, there's been so much written and talked about the James Webb Space Telescope and the amazing discoveries that we've seen from that. But when it got, to its resting spot in space, it had to sort of unfurl itself because it had to be crammed into the nose cone of its rocket. But if the nose cone, like in Starship, is so big because the commercial sector is innovating and building newer, bigger, more capable spacecraft, that could have a real impact just in the kinds of telescopes and the kinds of scientific payloads we put into space that could really pay dividends down the future. So I think it's a marrying of the two. It's not necessarily either or, but and, if you can get everyone working together. And that involves not just the commercial sector and the government, but international partners and, of course, academia as well.
So many interesting comments this hour. Lauren from Lansdale says she's a little less excited about Artemis than she was Apollo, given all the other problems on Earth that she sees. But Wendy says, I support Artemis because a lot of basic science is required for space missions, and at least this is one area where our taxes are funding real science, not political hokum. As we get ready to wrap up, just 30 seconds, Scott, but what's your biggest question about the feasibility of extended life on the moon? If there was like one burning thing you're like, I don't know the answer to this, and I'd be so curious if it went this way or that way, in about 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, I'll come back to what we were talking about earlier with the idea of reproduction. If we are ever going to truly live in space, we need to know whether it's possible to have children in a lower gravity, higher radiation environment. There's a lot of research that needs to be done in order to get us there. But ultimately, all of our future in space depends on being able to have kids there.
It all comes back to the birds and the bees, the basic stuff, no matter how far we get from our earthly home. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your perspectives this hour. Scott Solomon, professor of evolutionary biology at Rice. Thank you so much, Scott, for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you, Christian Davenport, CBS space correspondent, author of Rocket Dreams. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
And of course, thanks to Greg from Newark, Delaware, and to Chris from Newtown Square, Pennsylvania. Sorry we couldn't get to you, but thank you for calling in. Hopefully you'll call in another day. And of course, thanks to everybody who wrote in and commented online. And we couldn't do any of this without our producers. So thank you to Debbie Builder, Andreas Copes, and Hazel May Bryan. Al Banks engineered today's show. Mike Schiffler is our visual producer. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory. From Studio 2 here at WHYY in Philadelphia, I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman Aaron. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Tomorrow on Studio 2, have America's fashion habits become too casual and sloppy? No! The answer is no! A steakhouse restaurant chain recently made headlines for banning ball caps and athletic wear. Bad decision. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy says enough with sweatpants and lycras on airplane. Have some decency. I disagree, Mr. Secretary.
So, what does how we dress say about us as a society?
Says we're cool.
And what do we gain or lose by becoming less formal? And who should set the rules? That's coming up on Studio 2 tomorrow at noon. But coming up next, we have Here and Now.
Let it loose, folks. Let it loose.